The Bacchic Conspiracy of 186 BC by Titus Livius. A nameless Greek came first to Etruria, possessed by none of those many arts which the Greek people, supreme as it is in learning, brought to us in numbers for the cultivation of mind and body, but a dabbler in sacrifices and a fortune-teller. Nor was he one who, by frankly disclosing his creed and publicly proclaiming both his profession and his system, filled minds with error, but a priest of secret rites, performed by night. There were initiatory rites which at first were imparted to a few, then began to be generally known among men and women. To the religious element in them were added the delights of wine and feasts, that the minds of a larger number might be attracted. When wine had inflamed their minds, and night, and the mingling of males with females, youth with age, it had destroyed every sentiment of modesty. All varieties of corruption first began to be practiced, since each one had at hand the pleasure answering to that which his nature was more inclined. There was not one form of vice alone, the promiscuous matings of free men and women, but perjured witnesses, forged seals and wills, and evidence, all issued from this same workshop, likewise poisonings, and secret murders, so that at times not even the bodies were found for burial. Much was ventured by craft, more by violence. This violence was concealed because amid the howlings and the crash of drums and cymbals, no cry of the sufferers could be heard as the debauchery and murders proceeded. The destructive power of this evil spread from Etruria to Rome like a contagion of a pestilence. At first the size of the city, with abundant room and tolerance for such evils, concealed it. At length, information came to the Consul Postumius in about this manner. Publius Aebutius, whose father had performed his military service with a horse supplied by the state, was left a ward, and later, on the death of his guardians, was brought under the tutelage of his mother Duronia and his stepfather Titus Sempronius Rutilius. His mother was devoted to her husband, and his stepfather, who had so administered his guardianship that he could not render an accounting, desired that the ward should either be done away with or be made dependent upon them by some tie. The one method of corrupting him was through the bacchanalia. The mother addressed the young man. While he was sick, she said she had vowed for him that as soon as he had recovered, she would initiate him into the Bacchic rites. Being compelled, by the kindness of the gods, to pay her vow, she wished to fulfill it. For 10 days, she continued, he must practice continence. On the 10th day, she would conduct him to the banquet, and then, after ritual purification, to the shrine. There was a well-known courtesan, a freedwoman named Hispala Ficinia, not worthy of the occupation to which, while still a mere slave, she had accustomed herself, and even after she had been manumitted, she maintained herself in the same way. Between her and Aebutius, since they were neighbors, an intimacy developed, not at all damaging either to the young man's fortune or to his reputation, for he had been loved and sought out without any effort on his part, and since his own relatives made provisions for all his needs on a very small scale, he was maintained by the generosity of the courtesan. More than that, she had gone so far under the influence of their intimacy that, after the death of her patron, since she was under the legal control of no one, having petitioned the tribunes and the praetor for a guardian, when she made her will, she had instituted Aebutius, as her sole heir. Since there were these bonds of affection between them, and neither had any secrets from the other, the young man jestingly told her not to be surprised if he were away from her for several nights. As a matter of religious duty, he said, to free himself from a vow made for the sake of his health, he intended to be initiated into the Bacchic rites. When the woman heard this, she exclaimed in great distress, "The gods forbid!" She said that it would be much better for both him and for her to die rather than to do that, and she called down curses and vengeance upon the heads of those persons who had given him this counsel. Wondering both at her language and at her so manifest distress, the young man bade her spare her curses. It was his mother, he said, with the approval of his stepfather, who had ordered it. "Your stepfather, then," she replied, "is making haste, for perhaps it is not right to accuse your mother, to destroy in this way your virtue, your reputation, and your life." As he marveled the more, and asked her what she meant, beseeching gods and goddesses for peace and forgiveness if, compelled by her love for him, she had declared what should be concealed, she told him that while she was a slave she had attended her mistress to that shrine, but that as a free woman had never visited it. She knew, she said, that it was the factory of all sorts of corruptions, and it was known that for 2 years now no one had been initiated who had passed the age of 20 years. As each was introduced, he became a sort of victim for the priests. They, she continued, would lead him to a place which would ring with howls and the song of a choir and the beating of cymbals and drums, that the voice of the sufferer, when his virtue was violently attacked, might not be heard. Then she begged and besought him to put an end to this matter in any way he could, and not to plunge into a situation where all disgraceful practices would have to be endured and then performed. Nor would she let him go until the young man gave her his promise that he would have nothing to do with those mysteries. When he came home, and his mother began to tell him what he had to do that day and on the following days in connection with the rites, he informed her that he would do none of them, and that it was not his intention to be initiated. His stepfather was present at the interview. Straightway the woman exclaimed that he could not do without his mistress Hispala for 10 nights. Infected with the enchantments and poisons of that vampire, he had no respect for his mother or his stepfather, or yet the gods. Berating him thus, his mother on the one side, his stepfather with the 4 slaves on the other, drove him from the house. The young man thereupon went to his aunt Aebutius, and explained to her the reason why his mother had driven him out, and on her recommendation the following day reported the affair to the Consul Postumius, with no witnesses present. The consul sent him away with instructions to return the 3rd day. He himself asked his mother-in-law Sulpicia, a woman of high character, whether she was acquainted with an elderly woman, Aebutius, from the Aventine. When she replied that she knew that she was a virtuous woman of the old style, he said that he felt the need of an interview with her. Sulpicia should send her a message to come. Aebutius, summoned by Sulpicia, came, and a little later, the consul, as if he had come in by chance, brought in an allusion to Aebutius, the son of her brother. Tears flowed from the woman's eyes, and she began to bewail the fate of the young man who was robbed of his estate by those who should least of all have treated him thus, and who was then at her house, driven from home by his mother because the virtuous youth, might the gods be gracious, refused to be initiated into rites which, if reports were to be believed, were full of lewdness. The consul, thinking that he had learned enough about Aebutius to trust his story, sent Aebutius away and asked his mother-in-law to summon to her Hispala, also from the Aventine, a freedwoman and no stranger in the neighborhood. He wished to ask her also certain questions. Hispala, alarmed by her message, because without knowing the reason she was being summoned to so important and respected a woman, when she saw the lictors in the vestibule and the consul's retinue and the consul himself, almost swooned. Conducting her into the inner part of the house, with his mother-in-law present, the consul told her that if she could bring herself to tell the truth, she had no cause to feel alarmed. She should state to them what rites were usually performed in the nocturnal orgies at the bacchanalia in the grove of Stimula. When she heard this, such fear and trembling seized the woman in all her limbs that for a long time she could not open her mouth. Being at length restored, she said that, when quite young and a slave, she had been initiated with her mistress, that for many years after her manumission she had known nothing of what went on there. Then the consul praised her on this ground, that she had not denied that she had been initiated, but that she was to tell, under the same pledge, the rest as well. When she insisted that she knew nothing more, he told her that she would not receive the same forgiveness or consideration if she were convicted by the evidence of someone else as if she had confessed to her own accord. The man, he added, who had heard it from her, had told him the whole story. The woman, thinking without a doubt, as was indeed the fact, that Aebutius had revealed the secret, threw herself at the feet of Sulpicia, and at first began to plead with her not to try to turn the chatter of a freedwoman with her lover into something that was not merely serious, but even fatal. She had spoken thus for the purpose of frightening him, not because she knew anything. At this point, Postumius, inflamed with wrath, said that she believed even then that she was jesting with her lover Aebutius, and not speaking in the house of a most respectable matron, and in the presence of a consul. Sulpicia too lifted up the terror-stricken woman, and at the same time encouraged her and mollified the anger of her son-in-law. At length regaining her self-control, and complaining much about the treachery of Aebutius, who had returned such gratitude to one who deserved so well of him, she declared that she feared greatly the wrath of the gods whose hidden mysteries she was to reveal, but far more the wrath of men who would, if she informed against them, with their own hands tear her limb from limb. Accordingly, she begged Sulpicia and the consul that they would banish her somewhere outside Italy where she could pass the rest of her life in safety. The consul bade her be of good cheer, and assured her that it would be his responsibility to see that she could safely live in Rome. Then Hispala set forth the origin of the mysteries. At first, she said, it was a ritual for women, and it was the custom that no man should be admitted to it. There had been 3 days appointed each year on which they held initiations into the Bacchic rites by day. It was the rule to choose the matrons in turn as priestesses. Pacula Ania, a Campanian, she said, when priestess, had changed all this as if by the advice of the gods, for she had been the first to initiate men, her sons, Minius and Herennius Carinius. She had held the rites by night and not by day, and instead of a mere 3 days a year, she had established 5 days of initiation in every month. From the time that the rites were performed in common, men mingling with women and the freedom of darkness added, no form of crime, no sort of wrongdoing was left untried. There were more lustful practices among men with one another than among women. If any of the victims were disinclined to endure abuse or reluctant to commit crime, they were sacrificed as victims. To consider nothing wrong, she continued, was the highest form of religious devotion among them. Men, as if insane, with fanatical tossings of their bodies, would utter prophecies. Matrons in the dress of the bacchantes, with disheveled hair and carrying ablaze torches, would run down to the Tiber, and plunging their torches in the water, because they contained live sulphur mixed with calcium, would bring them out still burning. Men were alleged to have been carried off by the gods, who had been bound to a machine or borne away out of sight to hidden caves. They were those who had refused either to conspire or to join in the crimes or to suffer abuse. Their number, she said, was very great, almost constituting a second state. Among them were certain men and women of high rank. Within the last 2 years, it had been ordained that no one beyond the age of 20 should be initiated. Boys of such age were sought for, as admitted both vice and corruption. Having finished her testimony, again falling at their feet, she repeated the same prayers that they should banish her. The consul asked his mother-in-law to vacate some part of the house into which Hispala might move. An apartment above the house was assigned to her, the stairs leading to the street being closed up and an approach to the house arranged. All the household goods of Phrygia were at once moved, and her slaves summoned, and Aebutius was directed to move to the house of a client of the consul. When both witnesses were thus available, Postumius laid the matter before the Senate, everything being set forth in detail. First, what had been reported, then what he himself had discovered. Great panic seized the fathers, both on the public account, lest these conspiracies and gatherings by night might produce something of hidden treachery or danger, and privately, each for himself, lest anyone might be involved in the mischief. The Senate, moreover, decreed that the consul should be thanked, because he had investigated the affair both with great industry and without creating any confusion. Then the investigation of the bacchanals and their nocturnal orgies, they referred to the consuls, not as a part of their regular duties. They directed the consuls to see to it that the witnesses Aebutius and Phrygia did not suffer harm, and to attract other informers by rewards. The priests of these rites, whether men or women, should be sought out, not only at Rome, but through all the villages and communities, that they might be at the disposal of the consuls. That it should be proclaimed in addition in the city of Rome, and that edicts should be sent through all Italy, that no one who had been initiated in the Bacchic rites should presume to assemble or come together for the purpose of celebrating those rites, or to perform any such ritual. Before all, it was decreed that an inquiry should be conducted regarding those persons who had come together or conspired for the commission of any immorality or crime. Such was the decree of the Senate. The consuls ordered the cerule aediles to search out all the priests of this cult, and to keep them under surveillance, in free custody for the investigation. The plebeian aediles were to see to it that no celebration of the rites should be held in secret. The task was entrusted to the triumviri capitales of placing guards throughout the city, of seeing that no night meetings were being held, and of making provision against fire. As assistants to the triumviri, the quinqueviri ulscis tiberim were to stand guard, each over the buildings of his own district. When the magistrates had been dispatched to these posts, the consuls mounted the rostra and called an informal meeting of the people. And when the consuls had finished the regular formula of prayer which magistrates are accustomed to pronounce before they address the people, he thus began: "Never for any assembly, citizens, has this formal prayer to the gods been not only so suitable, but even so necessary. a prayer which reminds us that these are the gods whom our forefathers had appointed to be worshipped, to be venerated, to receive our prayers, not those gods who would drive our enthralled minds with vile and alien rites, as by the scourges of the Furies, to every crime and every lust. For my part, I do not discover what I should refrain from telling, or how far I should speak out. If you are left ignorant of anything, I fear that I shall leave room for carelessness. If I lay bare everything, that I shall scatter abroad an excess of terror. Whatever I shall have said, be sure that my words are less than the dreadfulness and the gravity of the situation. To take sufficient precautions will be our task. As to the bacchanalia, I am assured that you have learned that they have long been celebrated all over Italy, and now even within the city, in many places, and that you have learned this not only from rumor, but also from their din and cries at night, which echo throughout the city. But I feel sure that you do not know what this thing is. Some believe that it is a form of worship of the gods, others that it is an allowable play and pastime, and whatever it is, that it concerns only a few. As regard their number, if I shall say that they are many thousands of them, it cannot but be that you are terrified, unless I shall at once add to that who and of what sort they are. First, then, a great part of them are women, and they are the source of this mischief. Then, there are men very like the women, debauched and debauchers, fanatical, with senses dulled by wakefulness, wine, noise, and shouts at night. The conspiracy thus far has no strength, but it has an immense source of strength in that they grow more numerous day by day. Your ancestors did not wish that even you should assemble casually, and without reason, except when the standard was displayed on the citadel, and the army was assembled for an election, or the tribunes had announced a meeting of the plebeians, or some of the magistrates had called you to an informal gathering. And wherever there was a crowd collected, they thought that there should also be a legal leader of the crowd. Of what sort do you think you are? First, gatherings held by night. Second, meetings of men and women in common. If you knew at what ages males were initiated, you would feel not only pity for them, but also shame. Do you think, citizens, that youths initiated by this oath should be made soldiers? That arms should be entrusted to men mustered from this foul shrine? Will men debased by their own debauchery, and that of others, fight to the death on behalf of the chastity of your wives and children? Yet it would be less serious if their wrongdoings had merely made them effeminate. That was in great measure their personal dishonor, and if they had kept their hands from crime and their thoughts from evil designs. Never has there been so much evil in the state, nor affecting so many people in so many ways. Whatever villainy there has been in recent years due to lust, whatever to fraud, whatever to crime, I tell you, has arisen from this one cult. Not yet have they revealed all the crimes to which they have conspired. Their impious compact still limits itself to private crimes, since as yet it does not have enough strength to crush the state. Daily the evil grows and creeps abroad. It is already too great to be purely a private matter. Its objective is the control of the state. Unless you are on guard betimes, citizens, as we hold this meeting in daytime, summoned by a consul, in accordance with law, so there can be one held at night. Now, as single individuals, they stand in fear of you, gathered here all together in this assembly. Presently, when you have scattered to your homes and farms, they will have come together, and they will take measures for their own safety, and at the same time for your destruction. Then you, as isolated individuals, will have to fear them as a united body. Therefore, each one of you should hope that all your friends have been endowed with sound minds. If lust, if madness has carried off anyone into that whirlpool, let each consider that such a person belongs not to himself, but to those with whom he has conspired, to every wickedness and wrong. I am not free of anxiety lest even some of you, citizens, may go astray through error. Nothing is more deceptive in appearance than a false religion. When the authority of the gods is put forward as a defense for crime, there steals upon the mind a fear, lest in punishing human misdeeds we may violate something of divine law which became mixed up with them. From this scruple, innumerable edicts of the pontiff, decrees of the senate, and finally responses of the haruspices free you. How often in the times of our fathers and our grandfathers has the task been assigned to the magistrates of forbidding the introduction of foreign cults, of excluding dabblers in sacrifices and fortune-tellers from the forum, the circus, and the city, of searching out and burning books of prophecies, and of annulling every system of sacrifice except that performed in the Roman way. For men wisest in all divine and human law used to judge that nothing was so potent in destroying religion as where sacrifices were performed not by native, but by foreign ritual. I have thought that this warning should be given you, that no religious fear may disturb your minds when you see us suppressing the bacchanalia and breaking up these nightly meetings. All these things, if the gods are favorable and willing, we shall do. They, because they were indignant that their own divinity was being polluted by acts of crime and lust, have dragged these matters from darkness into the light, nor have they willed that they should be discovered in order that they might be unpunished, but that they might be coerced and suppressed. The Senate has entrusted the investigation of this affair by extraordinary assignment to my colleague and myself. We shall zealously carry through what has to be done by ourselves. The responsibility of keeping watch through the city we have entrusted to the minor magistrates. For you, too, it is proper, whatever duties are assigned to you, in whatever place each one is posted, to obey zealously, and to see to it that no danger or confusion may arise from the treachery of criminals. Then they ordered the decrees of the Senate to be read, and announced the reward to be paid the informer if anyone had brought any person before them or had reported the name of anyone who was absent. If anyone was named and had escaped, for him they would designate a fixed day, and if he did not respond when summoned on that day, he would be condemned in his absence. If anyone was named of those who were at that time outside the land of Italy, they would fix a more elastic date if he wished to come to plead his cause. They next proclaimed that no one should venture to sell or buy anything for the purpose of flight, that no one should harbor, conceal, or in any wise aid the fugitives. When the meeting was dismissed, there was a great panic in the whole city. Nor was this confined only to the walls or the boundaries of Rome, but gradually through all Italy, as letters were received from their friends concerning the decree of the Senate, concerning the assembly and the edict of the consuls, the terror began to spread. Many during the night after the day when the revelation was made in the meeting were caught trying to escape, and brought back by the guards whom the triumviri had posted at the gates. The names of many were reported. Certain of these, men and women, committed suicide. In the conspiracy, it was said more than 7,000 men and women were involved. But the heads of the conspiracy, it was clear, were Marcus and Gaius Atinius of the Roman plebs, and the Faliscan Lucius Opicarius, and the Campanian Minius Carinius. They were the source of all wickedness and wrongdoing, the story went, and they were the supreme priests and the founders of the cult. It was seen to that, at the first opportunity, they were arrested. They were brought before the consuls, confessed, and asked for no delay in standing trial. But so numerous were the persons who had fled the city that, since in many instances legal proceedings and causes were falling through, the praetors Titus Manius and Marcus Licinius were compelled, through the intervention of the Senate, to adjourn court for 30 days until the investigations should be finished by the consuls. The same depopulation, because at Rome men whose names had been given in did not respond or were not found, compelled the consuls to make the rounds of the villages and there investigate and conduct trials. Those who had merely been initiated, and had made their prayers in accordance with the ritual formula, the priest dictating the words, in which the wicked conspiracy to all vice and lust was contained, but had committed none of the acts to which they were bound by the oath against either themselves or others, they left in chains. Upon those who had permitted themselves to be defiled by debauchery or murder, who had polluted themselves by false testimony, forged seals, substitution of wills, or other frauds, they inflicted capital punishment. More were killed than were thrown into prison. There was a large number of men and women in both classes. Convicted women were turned over to their relatives, or to those who had authority over them, that they might be punished in private. If there was no suitable person to exact it, the penalty was inflicted by the state. Then the task was entrusted to the consuls of destroying all forms of Bacchic worship, first at Rome and then throughout Italy, except in cases where an ancient altar or image had been consecrated. For the future, it was then provided by decree of the Senate that there should be no bacchanalia in Rome or Italy. If any person considered such worship to be ordained by tradition or to be necessary, and believed that he could not omit it without sin and atonement, he was to make a declaration before the city praetor, and the latter would consult the Senate. If permission were granted to him, at a meeting where not fewer than 100 were in attendance, he should offer the sacrifice, provided that not more than 5 people should take part in the rite, and that there should be no common purse, or master of sacrifices, or priest. End of the Bacchic Conspiracy of 186 BC by Titus Livius. Translated by Evan T. Sage, 1936. Read by Dan Attrell. If you would like to support more work such as this, please visit patreon.com/themodernhermeticist. And above all, thank you for listening.